This is another sign of the times, an analysis, and a commentary. More extreme weather ahead in coming decades, report says. More people will be exposed to floods, droughts, heat waves, and other extreme weather associated with climate change over the next century than previously thought, according to a new report in the British medical journal, The Lancet. The report, published online, analyzes the health effects of recent episodes of severe weather that scientists have linked to climate change. It provides estimates of the number of people who are likely to experience the effects of climate change in coming decades, based on projections of population and demographic changes. The report estimates that the exposure of people to extreme rainfall will more than quadruple, and the exposure of people to drought will triple compared to the 1990s. In the same time span, the exposure of the older people to heat waves is expected to go up by a factor of 12, according to Peter Cox, one of the authors, who is a professor of climate system dynamics. Climate projections typically are expressed as averages over large areas, including vast expanses like oceans where people do not live. The report calculates the risk to people by overlaying areas of the highest risk for climate events with expected human population increases. It also takes into account aging populations. For example, heat waves pose a greater health risk to old people. The report is part of a series of efforts to analyze how climate change might affect human health. Other major climate reports, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a global document, and the National Climate Assessment in the United States have addressed the issue. But Professor Cox said the new report was the first large-scale effort to quantify the effects that different types of extreme weather would have on people. We are saying, let's look at climate change from the perspective of what people are going to experience, rather than as averages across the globe, he said. We have to move away from thinking of this as a problem in atmospheric physics. It is a problem for people. The Lancet first convened scientists on the topic in 2009 and produced a report that declared climate change was the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. The new report notes that global carbon emission rates have risen above the worst-case scenarios used in 2009, and that in the absence of any major international agreement on cutting those rates, projections of mortality and illness and other effects, like famine, have worsened. Everything that was predicted in 2009 is already happening, said Nick Watts, a public health expert at the Institute for Global Health at University College London, who led the team of more than 40 scientists from Europe, Africa, and China that produced the report. Now we need to take a further step forward. The science has substantially moved on. In other words, the effects of climate change are going to get worse before they get better, or so they say. For years, climate change was presented in terms of natural habitats and the environment, but more recently, experts have been looking at how it might change life on Earth for people. Scientists and some governments are trying to frame the dangers of climate change in health terms in order to persuade people that the topic is urgent, not simply a distant matter for scientists. Governments around the world are preparing for a United Nations summit meeting on climate change in Paris in December to discuss new policies to limit greenhouse gas emissions. The report measures the increase over time in exposure events, which it defines as the number of times people experience any given extreme weather event. By the end of the century, the report estimates the exposure to heat waves each year for older people around the world is expected to be around 3 billion more cases than in 1990. The number of times people of all ages are exposed to drought would increase by more than 1 billion a year. The rise in exposures to extreme rain would be around 2 billion a year by the end of the century, in part because populations are growing. Even without climate change, the health problems that come along with economic development are significant, the authors note. About 1.2 million people died from illnesses related to air pollution in China in 2010, the report said. Most broad climate reports do not go further than explaining the science, but much of the Lancet report is dedicated to policy prescriptions to slow or stop climate change and mute its effects on health. It notes that using fewer fossil fuels is no longer primarily a technical or economic question. It is now a political one, and urges governments to enact changes that would accomplish that. And in related news, heat wave in Pakistan hits slums the hardest. An intense heat wave has left at least 260 people dead over 3 days in southern Pakistan, mostly here in the port city of Karachi, officials said, prompting the government to declare an emergency at hospitals and to ask the military to help respond to the crisis. Unusually high temperatures, reaching up to 111 degrees Fahrenheit or 43.8 degrees Celsius, have led to heat stroke, dehydration, stomach-related pains, and low blood pressure among residents, hospital officials said. So then, in other words, climate change is increasing and happening more and more. So they say. Also, UNICEF report describes grim trends for the poorest. UNICEF has warned of what it described as grim trend lines for the world's poorest children over the next 15 years, saying in a new report that many millions face preventable deaths, diseases, stunted growth, and illiteracy. The forecast in the report by UNICEF, United Nations Children's Fund, suggested that despite reductions of poverty and other deprivations in underdeveloped countries since 2000, as seen in improved national averages, those statistics had obscured a worsening trend among the poorest segments of their populations and may have impeded overall progress. The report was described by UNICEF officials as its final report card on whether children had been helped by the so-called Millennium Development Goals, a group of benchmarks established by the United Nations in 2000 for measuring progress in reducing poverty, hunger, child mortality, gender inequality, illiteracy, and environmental degradation by the end of 2015. These goals are to be superseded by the Sustainable Development Goals, a group of benchmarks for measuring further advances by the end of 2030, which will be a major theme at the General Assembly annual meeting in September. The report showed, for example, that accounting for population growth, 68 million children under the age of 5 will die of mostly preventable causes by 2030 if current trends in child mortality continue, and 119 million children under 5 will suffer stunted development. It further showed that under current trends, 500 million people, more than the population of the United States, will be practicing open defecation in 2030, posing serious health risks. At current rates of progress, it said, girls from the poorest households in sub-Saharan Africa will not achieve universal lower secondary school education until 2111, almost a century from now. Measuring progress in achieving the 2030 goals should be done not only by statistical averages, but also by the degree to which the most disadvantaged children benefit. Yes, it really is about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations. And again, that should be a very important question to ask. Revelation chapter 9, verse 3. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. 4. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those humans which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. It's time for the physical and spiritual manifestation of the book of Revelation, and all these are more signs.